Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Draft. This week we are talking about first chapters and hooking your readers with the gripping first few pages of your story. We are joined tonight by guests Lindsay, Emory, and Alyssa Cole. And so we will kick things off by introducing everybody, and we'll start with Mary Chris.
Hi, I'm Mary Chris Escobar. I write women's fiction. And tonight I am drinking a bubbly Manhattan, which there is a post on our blog about how to make this if you want to scroll back and make it while you're watching the show. Cheers.
Julia.
I'm Julia Kelly, and I also write as Vivian Thorne, and I'm drinking a gin and tonic, fast and easy. And yeah.
Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Emory. I write contemporary romance and cozy mysteries, and I am drinking a Pinot Noir Rosé, which my husband called the good stuff. So it's pretty good so far.
And Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Cole. I write historical, post-apocalyptic, and romantic suspense and other stuff. And I'm drinking ginger beer because I'm cheating. Not technically alcoholic, but it has beer in the name, so I think it counts.
And it's awesome.
And I am Alexa San. I write erotic and contemporary romance, and I am also drinking a bubbly Manhattan, but my glass is not nearly as cool as Mary Chris's. Cheers, everyone. All right, so tonight we're talking about gripping our readers with first chapters. Do you guys worry a lot about the very first line? Anybody?
I don't worry too much about the first line. I mean, usually I do go back and end up rewriting that a few times when I'm doing revisions. More so I worry about the overall emotional impact. The first line is important to that, but I think even if it's not like an amazing first line, as long as it leads into something that draws the reader's interest, then it can still work.
Yeah, I think I'm less interested in the first line as introducing the character effectively, and I often like to start with dialogue. So if you can have a brilliant moment of dialogue, or if you can have a brilliant moment of action, kind of opening up a scene, that's fantastic. But not everybody is going to come up with brilliant lines of classic romance or other genre quality first lines. Every single time, it just it is what it is. So I'm interested in jumping right into who the character is that I'm dealing with, and I think that's what I'm more interested in. So it's more kind of the first impression than necessarily one line.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess when I first started writing, there's a school of thought out there that the first line has to be amazing, or people will close your book, walk away, and forget you ever existed. And so I think I stressed out about that a lot at the beginning, and later. And ever since then, it either comes to me or it doesn't. And then, you can always go back and change it. I think Stephen King has said that he's got some books where he knew the first line and they were amazing, and then some books he's written it like 60 times, something ridiculous. And so, I'm pretty much like Stephen King, so I'll go with that.
No big deal.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think I used to stress a lot more about it, that idea that you have to get somebody in the first line. But even when I was kind of thinking more about the first line, I would definitely write the whole first scene, and that was something in revisions I would go back and just constantly try to tweak that first line to get it right. I ultimately think I've come to the understanding that the first scene is probably really important, and people might close your book if they're after that first scene, but they'll probably overlook the line. But that being said, I do go back and look at my first lines again.
I guess I'm the weirdo in the group because I love first lines, and I kind of obsess over them just a little bit. Not stress over it, though, but I get excited by first lines, both reading them and writing them. When I have a first line that comes to me that's really symbolic of the story, I get really, really excited. So I'm an outlier on that one. But I was interested in what Alyssa had to say about setting up the emotional arc in the first chapter and setting the stage for the characters. Do you guys do the same thing? You want to start, Alyssa?
Yeah, I guess maybe that's why first lines, even though they're important to me, they kind of take second place, because thinking about it, I think a lot of the beginnings of my books are like interior thoughts of the character, whether it's in first person or third person, kind of setting the emotional scene, or like Julia said, like showing kind of who the character is. So I think for me, what's important, like I generally write pretty character-driven stuff, and where like obviously there is a plot, but the reader generally wants to know what's happening to the people, and they're not super worried about what's going on like outside of that. So I try and set up that interest in the character, and like, you know, trying to is like kind of because like I want to know what's going on with the character, so it's more like I'm trying to figure out what is the most important thing that the reader needs to know, besides like, you know, not that they played football in college or anything like that, but like what is their like emotional barometer at that moment? Are they in danger? Are they not in danger? Are they in emotional danger, physical danger, or is it just, if it's not like a suspense type of book, basically where they're at and why should the reader care that they're in that specific point in their life?
That's really good. Anybody else?
I think what I'm trying to do more than anything else is maybe a little bit with the emotion also, but really capture who the character is, and kind of give you, in an ideal world, you would be able to tell very quickly who exactly the person that I'm trying to tell you about is straight off the bat. So I wrote about a wedding planner once, and I wanted to make it very clear that she was very type A, very planning oriented, very crisis, kind of cool in a crisis type of person. And so I wanted to make sure that I was able to convey that, and so I opened with her handling a minor crisis at a wedding, just straight off, first line out of the book. And then that moved into a conversation where you kind of got more and more characterization about how she deals with that. But I think for me it was important to try to convey, this is the person that I'm dealing with. And it's also a novella, so you know, it's shorter, you know, you have less time. But I think, you know, in almost all, certainly in a lot of genre fiction that's character-driven, you're going to try to give it a sense of what it is that you're getting yourself into straight off the bat, because I think readers want some reassurance that they know they're in good hands. And I also think it serves you really well as a writer to kind of get straight to the heart of who this person is, without having to say, you know, Julia Kelly is a 5'6" woman with blonde hair who, you know, is sitting on her. You're trying to characterize something about that person that will kind of teach you about them.
I think I might be a little bit of an outlier here too. Not parallel, in that I think it's important to tell the reader right away, kind of show what your voice is and kind of the mood of the story, because maybe it goes back to when I'm a reader. You know, I might flip over and the first chapter and go, you know, I'm just not really in the mood for that kind of story right now. I'm not really thinking about character emotional issues as, do I feel like a lighthearted story or a suspenseful story or something like that. Like, I need to know right away kind of if that's matching my feelings. And so that's kind of what I go for. Like, if I'm writing a more lighthearted story, I want to go right in and show people that's what they're getting, because I don't want to change it later on and have people be mad at me.
So you're more focused on setting the stage and not quite so much on developing the character in the first chapter.
That's a slow burn.
I definitely fall more in the character-driven area. I want to set the character up, and you get an initial feel for you're about to meet this person and what their problem is going to be, but not everything. Which leads me to my next question of how much do you reveal in the first chapter? Mary Chris, do you want to start off with this one?
Yeah, I was going to say not a whole lot, I feel like. I do like the idea of dropping the reader sort of right into a scene, so I think I do sort of agree on that. And yes, like Julia said, if your character has very strong personality types, you want to, hint at that. Like, to use her example, if you've got the sort of strong type A wedding planner, you're not going to drop the reader into a scene where she's not behaving in that way, because you want them to sort of immediately know who she is. But I don't think you want them to know all aspects of that character. So if you've got that strong type A character, you're going to drop them in right on that, and then slowly let the reader maybe see a softer side, or whatever that is. But yeah, I definitely think you start one place. For me, I like to start with one place and then let the character develop and hopefully change a little bit from maybe what that initial reaction you had was. Like, you kind of got this initial reaction to who the character was, but what's nice if they can deepen and change your opinion as a reader. I love that when I'm reading books.
Anyone else?
I will. I write way too much, give away way too much information, but I can edit it out later. I have been known just to do the whole info dump and then cut that chapter. I have more first chapters that are in a Scrivener wastebasket than anything. Because I know what I'm doing now, sort of, when I'm writing it. Knowing like, well, this is way too much, but get it out of my system. I can cut it later and be more mysterious. Because I think that that's obviously the way to go. But in the first draft, it's not the way I do it.
No, I do agree. I think because you often like have this character in your head that you're ready to get on the page, and so it's really easy to quickly put everything down. And then, I completely agree. Like, I tend to write it all and then have to go back and pare it out and sort of more intersperse it for the rest of the book. Yeah, no, completely agree with that.
This is a little off topic, but in order to solve that problem, and I definitely have that tendency too, I've started writing kind of like a scene or a short story or a short interaction, and I think Alexis and I have talked about doing this before. I think you might have mentioned doing this as well, but basically having a sidebar thing that you don't really intend to put in the book, you don't really intend to publish, but you have this extra element. And actually, I do intend to publish them because Wattpad will take stuff like that as kind of like behind the scenes sort of stuff. So I have a bunch of also Scrivener, kind of like deleted scenes like you would see on a DVD of various character elements. So maybe your chapters can end up becoming something, just as a sidebar.
No, we totally had that conversation because I ended up with the book that I'm working on right now, Tempt. There are two, I call them extra scenes, but they're both prologues. One is from her perspective, one's from his perspective. They're not part of the book, but they're published on my blog and they're on Wattpad. They're not relevant to the story, but they were insight for me into who the characters were going to be so that I could be more mysterious in the first chapter. And then even in the book that I just published today, there are 2 chapters I ended up cutting because they were good to me as the writer, but ultimately they didn't fit in the book that you needed to read, so they got cut.
I guess like everyone, I try to keep it mostly mysterious, or sometimes I like putting, misdirection, where you think a character is doing one thing for one reason that could make sense and still is interesting, but then later you find out that they were coming at it from a different angle entirely. But yeah, I definitely have the first draft info dump problem too, so I also have to like go back and say they don't need to know like what her favorite color is and stuff like that.
She hated the color green because in 3rd grade, this is Watkins, yeah.
But that's important for you to know as an author.
Yeah.
Yes, vital.
Yeah.
I do love kind of introducing lots of questions in the first chapter that you don't necessarily answer or intend to answer anytime soon, but you introduce the character and there's this problem, but what were the motivations? What were the backstory? How is everyone involved? I don't know. Do you guys do that?
All the time.
All the time.
I mean, yeah, no, and I actually probably shouldn't admit this, but I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know the answer to those questions, and that's part of the fun of writing it. And, it's also the reason that I literally have a wall in my apartment that looks like I have just gone completely serial killer crazy, because there are Post-it notes everywhere, and it's kind of the whole plot of the serial I'm working on. And most of that sprung out of, okay, I raised all these questions in part 1. Now what am I going to do with them? And they can make for very gripping first chapters, because you have those moments of being like, oh, that's interesting. Let me see if I can like put this tiny little hook into my reader here, and then a tiny hook into a reader there. The thing is, you do have to resolve some of those questions at the end, otherwise you're going to have an unsatisfying ending. So that's a little bit of a different issue, but it is something to think about. And I think all of us do like being somewhat mysterious, because you don't want to give away the whole game right up at the front of your book, especially if you're writing a mystery, which, you know, Lindsay just had her mystery come out. You need to answer those questions, and you need to unpack kind of all that stuff you set up in the beginning. So just know that if you're going to start writing it, you got to answer it, or you're going to have a beta reader being very confused.
But what happened?
Right. What happened to that thing in that one part? Or why does he only have 4 fingers?
Or the character that just kind of gets left behind in 1 Week in Wyoming.
Yeah, there was a running joke in 1 Week in Wyoming. What was his name? I can't remember. Brad?
Patrick?
Patrick was this character who was a thread in several of our stories, because they were all interconnected, and he kind of started out as being more significant, and then none of us really did anything with him, so he was just like the extra hanger-on. And in the end, like, we need to go back and eventually write Patrick's story, because poor Patrick is just like wandering somewhere in the snows of Wyoming, wondering where his true love is, because everybody else hooked up, but he didn't. So.
And this is an important note, that even with 4 authors reading the same book, no one noticed that Patrick was alone until somebody reviewed it.
Right, and asked, where is Patrick? And then it became this moment of being like, we can't go back and fix it. Damn it, we need to like write Patrick his own book.
Like, Patrick's story is coming later.
Right, it's
did that on purpose. ...
I was wondering where Patrick was. I kept thinking, no, I didn't remember. I don't think I would have put that in a review, but I think I asked Alexandra, like, is Patrick, who's doing Patrick? And she was like,
do you want to do Patrick? So yeah, learn from our example and don't do that.
Well, it could be a genius move. It could be a genius move, because in this day and age, you need a series, so it could be Patrick's series.
There you go.
Well, he could continue to be a little thread that never gets resolved in all of the books, right? So everyone's just constantly reading.
Yeah, he's just the saddest guy in all of them.
But how satisfying will his story be when, after we've left him out of Wyoming and Hawaii, and I guess we haven't announced the next one, so I won't say what it is, and then we finally write him an after story, and he finally gets...
It's true. He'll have his one moment of love. It will be fine. Poor Patrick.
All right, enough of that tangent. Back to first chapters. One thing that I am obsessed with, and is the problem I think all of us face, is how close do you start the story to the action of the book? Because the tendency for a lot of us is to start too far away from the action, and you have too much lead up to what the story is actually about. So how do you deal with that? Here, Chris?
I feel like I talked to one of you about this. That is definitely another place where I edit, like where I probably write in more backstory, and then I end up realizing the story should start somewhere else. So I might write a few scenes and then realize where I should start it. And I think where that came from is a writing class I took years ago, where the instructor said you need to drop the character, like drop the reader right into action. And so in my very first book, it was a wedding reception, and so I opened the book with, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the dance floor, you know, the newly married couple, which of course everyone immediately knows you're at a wedding. It immediately puts you in the setting. And so I think that just stuck with me, probably also because he had also said don't ever open a book with dialogue, which obviously I did. And so I kind of like kept one rule and broke the other one. Right, I don't know. The same professor immediately turned right around and was like, well, but if you do it like that, it's okay. So rules are meant to be broken. But I think that really, like, that has just stuck with me, that you have to drop right into the action, which I always keep in mind when I'm revising, but I don't always get right in the very first draft, because sometimes you have to start, for me at least, I have to start with some of that backstory to figure out exactly what moment I want to drop the reader in for action.
I've had a couple of problems with this. Like, for example, my first book, the couple don't actually meet on the page until chapter 3. And it's like one of them, he knows who she is, and he's kind of like watching her, not in a creepy way, but but like one of the things was like, people were like, editors were like, oh, can you have them like meet before this, or maybe they can walk by each other, and I was like, well, no, that like messes up kind of the point of the story. So it depends, I think, for me on the story. Like, sometimes I drop the reader into the action and like when the couple is going to meet, and other times it's action that just has to do with either, you know, a hero or heroine, because, you know, it's more relevant to the story than they're actually meeting, because, you know, it's a romance, they're going to meet at some point pretty soon. And I hope that like in those cases where they meet later, I'm hoping that I'm basically laying enough breadcrumbs and putting enough kind of interest. Oh God, sorry. Interest.
He's got a house full of dogs right now, guys. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, guys. Like just basically building. I try and make it into a tension building thing instead of just like the reader waiting to see what happens. Like that they know that they're gonna meet, they can feel it coming, and that's something they're looking forward to, instead of like flipping forward to the point where they first run into each other.
I do want to stop you for a second, because one of the things we did with both of your introductions for this was to tease that you had done first chapters that we thought really grabbed people and you know, dragged them into the story immediately. So I do want you to talk a little bit about what you did for Be Not Afraid, because that is a unique meet cute and I think quite attention grabbing.
So Be Not Afraid it's a Revolutionary War romance. It's in an anthology for Love and Liberty, and eventually I'll put it out as a standalone novella. But that meet cute came because it's basically a Revolutionary War. They meet during a battle, or the end of a battle, on the outskirts of a battle, and it's basically a meet cute over a dead body. And the heroine has just killed you know, there are actually two dead bodies. The hero kills someone, and then the heroine kills someone, which I just thought of, which I just realized. But so basically, you know, they're having their banter and getting to know you over the dead body of an English officer. And at first I was like, can I do this? But I was like, it works in the moment. It's during a war. It's not like they're not like totally immune to the fact that there are dead bodies around, but they're also interested in each other and you know, what's going on with either of them. And so that kind of became and that story kind of becomes a thread, like meeting over dead bodies, which is kind of morbid, but I figure like any love story that takes place during a war is going to be kind of morbid. There's, you know, a lot of messed up stuff going on, and it's kind of the contrast to the death and the destruction and the uncertainty is like, you know, meeting someone and falling in love. So it basically was just a really blunt reminder of that.
And it works really well because it works with the time and the place. And I'm talking right now mostly so that my screen is up so you guys can actually see. I don't have Lindsay's book, but I know somebody else who does, so we're going to put it up too. But yeah, if you're interested in people who meet over dead bodies, I promise it's excellent. This is for Love and Liberty. So yes, it's very exciting. Yeah, Lindsay.
But Lindsay also has an amazing first chapter that involves a dead body. What is with the dead bodies?
There's absolutely a theme on the podcast. It's not just first chapters. It's dead bodies in first chapters.
That is so funny. Well, I think that's a really good tip. Put a dead body in.
When in doubt.
Well, it automatically sets up conflict. You know, reader wants to be hooked into a mystery. It can set up a character arc because how the person's going to deal with the dead body situation. You know, that first chapter, I had just decided to write a cozy mystery on a whim, and hadn't read that many, maybe 2 or 3 beforehand, and maybe read some blog posts on how to do it. And everyone said put the murder as soon as you can. And so I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And I will just say that first chapter is probably the least edited first chapter I've ever written. It just kind of flowed, and I don't think if there was editing, it was kind of minor line stuff and wording. But I'm pretty proud of that, so I'm gonna actually take that.
It works.
And thank you. I don't know if I can ever do that one again. The sequel to that, which is coming out, has been rewritten several times to try to live up to that standard. But it was fun.
That's interesting that there's minor editing to that first chapter. My very first chapter for The Storm Inside it's an interesting first chapter, let's put it that way. And it was not really edited either. Has that ever happened to any of you?
Yes, but not on my first book. My first book I completely rewrote. I literally scrapped the entire, and I've done that a couple of times actually. I've scrapped entire parts of books, and realizing that, you know, once you get in, sometimes you need to be willing to throw away work because you realize that what you're doing doesn't fit the character or the story that you're writing, and it doesn't do good service to the story, because like we've been talking about, you need to kind of combine where you are in the plot and the emotional impact and the character. But really, for me, the stuff I had written was boring, and so, you know, that wasn't going to work. The serial that I'm writing right now is probably the longest wait I've had until you really get into the meat of the story, which is ironic because it's a serial and it probably should move on a lot faster. But I think that it worked for the setting up and the mental state of the main character to do it that way. But normally, like I said before, you know, I am straight into dialogue, and it's just, I'm a journalist by trade, and I was in TV for a very long time, and the rule in TV is you lead with your best video, and if your best video is somebody crying because something horrible just happened to them, you want them to be the one that's telling your story. You don't want you as a narrator to be sitting there writing along, and, you know, or as a reporter writing along. And so that was kind of the guiding principle that I took from that profession, and you know, brought into romance writing, which has strange similarities and a lot of differences too. So I think that more often than not, that's what I end up leaning on. But that's probably just because of the training that I had and what I do for work every single day. So.
Well, and the first chapter is an opportunity to give you that snapshot right away, to grab the attention, to show them what the story is about, set the scene, and so the journalistic principle there is, it's a good one.
Yeah, no, it works. It works if you are using it effectively, and I think that that's the rule with everything we've been talking about today. Different books are going to require different scenarios, so you need to be careful about and sit down and say, okay, what is it that I actually am writing here? Am I writing a really action-packed, you know, romantic suspense that really needs to move in and just get going really quickly, or is it something where I can have a little bit of a slower build, but kind of really get in and get into who these characters are, or get into the tone of what the book is going to be like?
I think for me, generally, I rewrite all the time as I'm writing, which is a problem because, you know, you're supposed to, you know, let it sit and go back and reread. But as I'm writing, like, I'll think of something from like a couple pages before and then go back and then end up rewriting a whole bunch of stuff, or think of some. So I'm like generally constantly, or sometimes for me, because I'm a pantser, usually I go back and reread like a few pages from where I left off, and then I'll make changes on that, then continue writing, and then when I start again, I'll reread like some of those pages and go forward. But like for me, with the not editing, that usually works for like shorter stories, because those stories kind of, like if I'm writing like the Hanukkah short, or like the Vaseline dude sci-fi porn thing I did, like I think for me it's easier in a way with short stories to kind of like, and again I think this is part of like the pantsing part, where it's like, all right, is this section of the story, and I already kind of have an idea of how it's going to go. And so for some reason that comes out easier editing. Like I generally have to edit less on those things, but as when writing like full-length stories or novellas, I go back and edit all the time.
Yeah, I would agree. I edit as I go along, so yeah, I do think I often, is everybody okay?
I think some dogs just fell down.
Sorry, I had a husband peering at me. That's why I was looking up.
No, I'm also a pantser, and I think that's a really normal thing to just keep kind of going back and editing as you go along. I think I've been a little bit all over the place with whether I do a lot of rewrites at the beginning or not. Interestingly, when you asked that question, I really thought about it, and my very first novel, I tore apart and rewrote entirely with a repeating week structure, but I did not rewrite the first scene. So really interesting that one stayed. But I think most of my other books, aside from, again, a shorter novella that I sort of had an inspiration for the first scene, I didn't change that, but the other two I definitely went back and tweaked quite a bit after I finished the book. So I guess I do a little bit of both there.
I think there could be something really magical about writing that first chapter, even if you end up throwing it away. It's just like that's the beginning, you know, that's when you're feeling it, that's when you're inspired, that's when your muse is starting to click. And so just going with it and not even worrying if you're going to edit or rewrite or if you've got the right people in the right places. Just follow what you're going to do, because even if you throw it out, you might twist it later or might teach you something that you definitely want to bring out later. So that would be my big tip. But I wanted to also go back to a second. I'm taking notes just to keep my head straight. When we talk about putting the hero and heroine in together, the first scene, for romance, I kind of think that that's good advice, but sometimes all you need is just their conflict. Yeah. And that kind of makes you want to, just the first couple of scenes where they're either talking about each other or they're like, oh, I hate cops, I'm never going to date a cop. And then when she meets the hot cop, the reader's like, she met the hot cop, what's going to happen now? So I guess I've just read a couple of books like that lately where they build you up so good, and then you don't even realize that the hero and heroine haven't met yet because you know it's going to be good when they do.
An example of that I read recently was Tamsin Parker's Personal Geography. I was really mad at her for like 4 or 5 chapters or something. I was like, this is taking too long. And then they finally get together, and I was like so satisfied because she had done such a good job of building the tension and introducing the conflict that even though I, as the reader, just wanted to be satisfied immediately, I was so satisfied when we finally got to that point that I forgave her.
This is like the Tom Hiddleston, the delayed gratification thing with Cookie Monster. I don't know if you guys have seen that. Where he makes Cookie I'll find the link for it, but he makes Cookie Monster wait to eat his cookie because obviously things are better when you wait for them.
Tom Hiddleston is never not going to be sexual, and whatever, we'll just get over it right now.
It's completely inappropriate for Sesame Street, but amazing.
Talk amongst yourselves for a minute, because I'm looking something up, and it's not Tom Hiddleston related. I swear it's writing. I'm trying to remember the name of a Carolyn Crane book because I'm terrible with titles, and there is a book that she wrote that's wonderful, and I can't think and type at the same time, and so we're just Behind the Mask, I think, is the second one. No, Into the Shadows is the second one, and I think the hero and heroine don't meet for a while in the book, and when they do, it's just so, like, there's so much tension, and I think you've seen her from a distance or something like that, so there is a relation between the two of them, or relationship. They just aren't right there together with each other, so it definitely can work. I think you have to be careful and you have to do it really, really well. It's just really, really, and that book deserved to win a Rita. It was really, really good. But yeah, no, it's one of those things. Off the Edge, it's one of those books. Anyway, I'm terrible with titles, so. But yeah, it definitely can be effective. I think you just have to be very conscious about the decision that you're making, as I think all of us are saying with whatever decision you make in terms of your first chapters.
So what do you try to make sure is there in that first chapter so that when they get to the end of their Kindle sample, they don't say, meh, I'm not going to read this one?
I want there to be some sort of tension, some sort of. I want there to be some sort of tension, no matter if the tension is the, oh my God, she's never going to date a hot cop, but there's a hot cop, so clearly she's going to date the hot cop, but it's exciting for whatever reason, or whether it is the two of them, smacked together, and it's literally sexual tension that you're dealing with. So I think that that's a really big part of just some sort of push and pull.
Yeah, I agree with the tension and also just, a conflict that is interesting to the reader that really makes them want to read on because, like we were saying before, it's a romance. We know that ideally, unless the author wants to get beat up, that the hero and heroine or the hero and heroine, whoever, will be getting together at the end of the book in some form. So really some kind of conflict that draws the reader in and makes them want to see exactly how it happens or, what obstacles they have to face to get there. So just kind of in the first chapter laying down, like, just a hint, or sometimes it can just be like, here's what it is, but just something that makes them eager to find out what happens.
I like to end the chapter with some sort of question hanging out there for the reader. Okay, I've reached the end of the chapter, I've met the characters, and here's the question that I need to have answered, so I'm going to turn the page and keep reading to the second chapter.
Yeah, I would. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I almost think that that last line of the first chapter might be more important than the first line of the first chapter.
Very interesting. I like that.
Just because everyone who starts a book is starting it for a reason, and they're going to go, and I don't know. I think that, just going back to, I'm not really sure if the first line thing means anything anymore, but especially in this day of the samples, you've got that last first line, and it's like, well, I don't know, I can't think of something clever off the top of my head. But, something that they're going to be like, hit by.
Yeah.
So this day and age, that might be more important than the first line.
That's a good point.
I always think of the last sentence of the first chapter of The Hunger Games, which is, it's basically, it wasn't my name on the slip, it was Primrose Everdeen. And you're like, oh man, first page, and find out what's going to happen. That was one of my favorite first chapters ever, was The Hunger Games, because it just did such a good job of setting up the characters in the world of District 13, and the kids are going to go kill each other, and that it's really scary, and you don't want to do that, and oh shoot, my sister is the one who's got to go do that. What do I do? And I just really loved the way she set up the first chapter of The Hunger Games. It was a lot of questions and a lot of answers all in one chapter.
And do you remember the first line of The Hunger Games?
No, but it's right there. I can go look it up. They were in bed. I remember that they were in bed. She was waking up.
There was a nightmare.
It was either a nightmare or her sister was moving or something like that, and she was like, "Why? What's going on?"
We've read it a few times.
Only a few.
I remember that because it came up recently, because there's this whole statistic about how many books start with a character waking up in bed and how that might not be the best idea, but that one came up as like, but it worked for the Hunger Games, obviously, like, to have the character, there's always an exception to the rule. I think the other thing, in that first chapter to hook readers in is to have them feel invested in your character. So I definitely think from any perspective, but definitely from a women's fiction perspective, where the romance is going to be there but might not be as evident in the beginning, you want them to sort of on some level care about your character, whether that's because they can see themselves in the character or they're concerned for the character, but you want them to somehow sort of have that buy-in with whoever your main character is or your main characters, so that they're either super curious because they're such an interesting, quirky person, or they really relate to them and want to make sure they're okay and want to keep reading for that reason. So I think everything kind of that you've all said ties into that with the tension and everything, but really you want the reader to have some kind of vested interest in who the characters are.
I think Lindsay did a really good job of that in Sisterhood is Deadly, because you did introduce the hot cop. I mean, we're going to go back to the cops here real quick, but there was no clear indication one way or the other whether or not that was going to be the love interest or not. But I was really invested in...
I wanted it to be the love interest, and therefore I made it the love interest in my head.
Well, I think we all did.
Yes.
But there was no obvious indication that that was a definite, because she's this, you know, sorority chick, and he's a cop who clearly does not want to have anything to do with her. But I was so invested in the character from right when the story began, because she had such an interesting voice, and she was so very clear from line one that, you're right, Mary Chris, I was just very invested in the character, and I wanted to see where it went.
Well, and in that case, too, you know, she was a sorority girl, and I went to a school that didn't have sororities. So to me, this is a very foreign world, and kind of talking about sisterhood and the rituals and all these things, and I kind of was dumped in, and I was just like, I don't really know what's going on. But then you have that moment of this woman having like a little tiny snarky jab, like she understands that all of this probably looks crazy to somebody on the outside, but it's still very much a part of her, and I think that's really effective. And in Alyssa's book, Radio Silence, you know, start and you're kind of jumped into this moment, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I want people to experience. It's a very raw and very emotionally tense. I don't want to say fraught, because it's not fraught, but it's a very kind of like you're intense, and this whole moment is intense, and everything is intense in a really positive way. But you also get this sense that this character does not want to be here, and it sets up this tone of there's going to be conflict. Obviously, it's a romance, so there's going to be conflict within the characters once you meet the hero. But there's also a lot of internal conflict for this character as well, and that's going to characterize a lot of what she does throughout the book. So you get a really strong sense that kind of there's this intensity about it. And I think that the book is intense, and so it makes sense with what you end up with in the end.
And Alyssa, I love the first chapter of Radio Silence too, because you had so much to do in that chapter, and you're introducing a post-apocalyptic scenario and the relationship and the internal conflict, and it all felt so seamless. So I don't know, did you have to rewrite that? Or
I did rewrite that. Like, the general scene was the same. I did tweak some things. And I think maybe that has been the easiest thing. Well, no, because first it was in third person, and it just wasn't working. And I was like, I'll never write in first person. And then I was like, all right, this book has to be in first person. And then after that, it flowed much more easily, because like it was just easier the voice came through more clearly. But yeah, that definitely took a lot of tweaking to get it right, because I was like, you know, again, don't want to give too much away, but like, is this weird happening right now with all this other stuff going on? So it took a lot of tweaking, but yeah. I'm glad it came together.
No, and you're reading it and you're like, this seems so normal, but it's not. Like, it's a kind of an unlikely event, but it felt normal. I don't know how to put that, but it could have something that could happen, you know, down the street.
It sets up the context of the world, right? This is something where what is normal in our everyday life is not actually, in fact, what is not normal in our everyday life. And it's a violent incident, I think I can say that. But this violence seems very much like it's necessary, and I think it sets up the precedent of we're not in the normal world as you and I know it. We are in a very, very different environment, and it is the post-apocalyptic precedent, right? Unless you're going to start a book like that before the event that creates all the chaos happens. I think, you know, dumping you into the middle of this moment where there's chaos and kind of explaining without explaining that this is now what these people are coping with, and it's not a this might happen, it's a this will happen. It's almost an expectation there's going to be some sort of violence or tension or whatever. It sets up the rest of the book for the reader. And the reader can also sit there and say, okay, I know what that is, and I know what to expect, and so I don't even have to be reminded over and over and over again, you know, this is what's normal now in this world.
And I talk about a page turner. I'm sorry, but talk about a page turner at the end of that. I mean, you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to find out why these people are here, what's happened to their radio, you know, all this. Why do they only have a backpack? And you know, that was a good one.
Thank you. And I think hearing you guys talk about this made me realize that one of the things that I don't think about but subconsciously think about when I'm writing a first chapter is like kind of, what is the worst thing that could happen to this character that would like that the reader would care about, obviously, because different characters would have different worst things, but like, and I think this kind of goes to like one of the first writing classes I took was with Dee Davis. I don't know if you guys know Dee Davis. She writes romantic suspense and a few different things. But she was talking about basically how a lot of stories as a writer come from what if moments, like, you know, what if blah blah blah, and like Radio Silence was basically like, what if everything stopped working and we were just screwed. So kind of like going on that what if moment, like leading into the first chapter, depending on what kind of book you're writing, then it can be like, what if this happened, and if that happened, what would be like a really, not necessarily terrible, but like what would be something that would be really like traumatic or difficult for the character, and then put them in that situation. Depending on if you're going for like, you know, angst, or if you're going for a romantic comedy or something, that could be what could be the most embarrassing moment, or, you know, depending on the genre of the book.
Well, yeah, going back to Mary Chris's book that started with the wedding, you know, that's kind of the same thing, the worst situation that could happen. Although it could get worse, but it does. But, you know, for someone just starting off, you're reading it going, oh, that's bad. That's really bad. How is she going to get out of this one? And,
yeah, and it's very true. I mean, I start that with someone getting extremely drunk and giving a toast, and that came out of a whole what if for me, where I gave a toast at a wedding, and I was not extremely drunk, but it was very short, and I felt extremely unprepared to give this toast, and it was like horribly embarrassing because I had like 4 sentences on a note card, and it took like 30 seconds, and people thought I was starting, and I was done. But that's not really like, that's not enough steak, right? Like, you can't write that. Like, it's funny to talk about, but like, you write that in a book, and people are like, whatever. So I was like, what if that had been really, really bad? So I took that moment, and I was like, okay, so one, she could have like been drunk and passed out, but two, like, the groom in the wedding could have been a guy that she dated in the past. And so, you know, like all these things, like how do we raise the stakes to make people really invested in the story? But yeah, it totally grew out of a what if that had been really, really, really bad.
Well, we have time for maybe one last round of advice for writers out there on their first chapters.
I'm going to start because I'm being rude and just jumping in, and I don't usually get to actually just be a guest. This is exciting for me. So you should write something that you are interested in. It sounds so basic, but it was one of those things that Rachel Aaron wrote in a book called 2K to 10K. And she was talking about editing. And she basically said, if you're not interested in your story, nobody else is going to be interested in your story. And I had this moment of being like, oh, damn it. Because I was in the middle of writing something, and I was like, I really don't want to finish this edit, and I couldn't figure out why I was dragging my feet, and I realized I wasn't interested in the story anymore, so I had to go back and figure out a way to make it work, and it made it much, much better. But take my advice early, or Rachel's advice early, and do it before you actually get into the point where you're 45,000 words into editing a 100,000 word novel and realizing you need to go back and do it all over again because your book just isn't interesting to you. So I think that with first chapters, write something that would grip you as a reader, because we are readers as much as we are writers. And you I always feel bad about saying you should be reading because I feel like somebody's third grade teacher, but you should be reading because it's, you know, something that is going to help you in the long run with, you know, character development and all this stuff. Just expand kind of what you're doing. So be interested and try as much as you can to be a reader as well as a writer of your own first chapter and see if it's something that you can stick around for.
I'll piggyback on that, but just to start saying, definitely try reading, you know, across the board, but when you think about the books that affect you the most personally, that you enjoy the most, and the first chapters, and what is it, like, you don't have to analyze them if you can, but like if you just reread them and think about, like, what is it exactly that pulled you in, and do you want to implement any of that in your writing, or is it possible for you to? Because I think a lot of times people, whether consciously or not, are writing what they want to read. So if you look at the other things that you enjoy reading, and by the same token, whatever that phrase is, you can also see the chapters that you don't like or that don't pull you in, and see like what didn't work for you personally as a reader. And just one other thing I would say is, like, really make sure you lay down the stakes for the character, even if nothing crazy happens in the first chapter, even if it's not like some intense moment, or like, but the reader should know, like, leading up to something, like, these are the people that are important to the character, these are the things that are important to the character, and if anything were to happen, these are the things that will be at stake for the character later in the book. So I guess that would be the other.
Absolutely.
I'll go kind of along the same lines as something I said before, was just, you know, find your magic. What's going to make you happy when you just let it out, let it go. You know, what you write, the first scene you write might not be the front of the book. It might end up being the middle scene, or that might be what got your heart pumping. You want to write the low moment because that's the first thing you want to write. Just start there and follow the muse and see what happens. And if it's the first scene and it's crappy later, you can cut it out, because we all do.
Hey, Chris?
Yeah, I would just say, to piggyback on that, I mean, the book has to start, and it starts with that first chapter, and it starts with sitting down and getting that out. So I think my advice would be not to worry about it. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of tips for sort of how to make that first chapter engaging, but ultimately the first thing you have to do is write the whole story and then go back and figure out like if that was the right place to start. Because if you don't write the whole story, you'll never know if you need to edit the first chapter or how to make that first line really hook people in. So kind of piggybacking on what Lindsay said, just whatever that story on your heart is, write it. Don't worry so much about, is this the right first chapter, until you're done. And then you can go back and make that determination about whether you started in the right place or not. But the most important thing is to start.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to go to the middle of the action and take a step back and see if that's the right place to start. And if it's not, then take another step back and see if that's the right place to start. And if it's still not, take another step back. And you keep stepping back until you find the first place where you can really introduce the character and it makes sense, but still be close to the action. And so that's one of the techniques I tend to use a lot. But everybody else said everything else that I would have said, so I'm not going to repeat it. We have reached the end of our time. So thank you guys for watching. We're going to go around the room one last time and say who we are, what we have coming up, if we have anything interesting coming up, where we can find us. We'll start with Mary Chris.
All right. Again, I'm Mary Chris Escobar. You can find me at my website, which is in my little bar down there, marychrisescobar.com. I guess right now I'll promo. I am doing some cool stuff on Wattpad with one of my novellas. I learned about at RWA how I can go back and put in some really fun bonus content, like songs, and since my books are set where I live, I actually have pictures of some of the real places in my book. So I'm releasing Delayed, my novella, chapter by chapter on Wattpad with some bonus content. I'm actually due to release a chapter tonight, so if you're watching this live, I will be doing that as soon as we hang up this call. So, so go check that out. So on Delayed on Wattpad, and find me at my website.
Lindsay.
That beautiful paperback that is above Alexis's.
This one.
I have one too someplace. Yes, that one. That is coming out August 11th, and then its sequel is due out. Look at that! Its sequel is still due out in November, so that's what I'm working on. And I'm going to be checking out Wattpad because y'all keep mentioning it, so I'm going to be.
We're spreading the word, Zoe, if you ever see it.
Yeah, right. Remind me, and I'll send you an email, Lindsay, and anyone else who's watching, I'll send you an email, too, if you're interested in some Wattpad information. And the next person on my bar is Julia, so you go next.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so I am still working through the serial that I've got going. You'll see it a couple more times on this because it's going through September. So The Lady Taken, and that is under the name Vivian Thorne rather than Julia Kelly. I also... it's the 4th today? Okay, so I, on the 7th, am going to be putting out the cover for my standalone Out of the Wyoming book. I do not have Patrick in my Wyoming, but my novella from that the cover reveal will be on the 7th, and then that is coming out October, the first week of October. Lexi has the book up right now, if you can see it in the little bar below. And yeah, I'm working away on some more one-week stuff and some special little projects as well, so hopefully some good news soon to share, but not yet, so you'll have to just wait. I'll be a tease.
And next up, the lovely Alyssa, who is the furthest one to join us today, and we're very excited about that.
Yes.
So the 3rd book in my Off the Grid series comes out in October. But if you go to my website, alyssacole.com, you can read the first chapter in the little coming soon section. So I have the first chapter of that up. And yeah, and if you haven't read the other books, you can go read this. So that's it for now for me.
And I am Alexis Ann. You can find me at alexisannbooks.com. I have this bad boy out right now, Tempt. He's very pretty. The second book and the serial came out today. And other than that, I'm posting some bonus content on Wattpad because it's the cool thing to do right now. And we would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. We will see you on the first Tuesday of next month, which is September, and we will be talking about something.
We'll tell you
Thanks for having me.
Figure it out.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming, and everybody have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.